Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for watching this unusually formative talk. My name is Liza. I am from the University of Gießen in Germany, and I represent the panel on planetary thinking. I'm really excited to be sharing this work in progress with you that Nora and I have been working on for a while. The title of today's presentation is Reading the Speaking Animal, Biotechnology and Animal Uplift in Adam Roberts' Bête. And as I've already mentioned, since this is a work in progress, we're aiming for developing this into a longer and more substantial chapter. We really welcome your feedback, and Nora will be present for the Q&A, but also if we raise your interest, feel free to send us an email and we're open and happy to hear your thoughts on ours. And now I will hand over to Nora to dive in with our first slide.
Yep, so I'm Nora. I'm from the University of Warwick in the UK. And I'll just dive right in. So in 2020, Bunny the dog went viral on TikTok. The sheepadoodle was using a soundboard of buttons to communicate with her owner. Questions abounded. Did she really understand language, or was she just associating specific button presses with specific responses? As of 2022, Bunny produces phrases like "I dog, we friend," and "Why mad sound" when the neighbor's dog is howling. And there's now an army of animals on TikTok and other platforms using these buttons, which were originally inspired by assistive technology used for nonverbal children to communicate. There's also a related research project called They Can Talk that is researching how much non-humans can express themselves in human language. There's a long history of humans trying to teach other animals how to communicate on human terms. Reaching from Hans the horse, who became famous for his talent in spelling and extracting square roots in 1906, via Coco the gorilla, who learned to sign in sign language in the 1970s, to Alex the African gray parrot, who made headlines in 2007 for speaking English. It's only recently that technologies like the soundboard or the less scientifically rigorous dog translator apps have been applied in these attempts at facilitating human-animal communication. But such technology has a long history in SF, and its exploration in fiction can tell us a lot about the ethical issues at play with such technological inventions.
All right, and I will provide you with some brief background on talking animal figures in literary fiction now, because these have been a staple in fantasy fiction in particular, with many folk tales and children's books especially relying on animals that speak. But the tradition reaches back to ancient texts as well, such as Aesop's animal fables, or Buddhist story collections like the Jakarta tales, for example. However, anthropocentric reasoning concluded for a long time that the absence of human-like language and animal behavior proves they were lacking communicative skills. So the result was that speaking animal characters were pushed to the margins of the Western literary canon, but they did prove persistent figures. And already in the 18th and 19th century, talking animal characters reappeared in romantic poetry and Victorian animal autobiographies, for example. E.T.A. Hoffmann's Kater Murr, the cat narrator of the German satire Lebensansichten des Kater Murr, might be among the most famous non-human narrators next to Anna Sewell's Black Beauty of the eponymous anti-cruelty horse autobiography. And recently, non-human narrators are even gaining popularity in more widely read novels, such as Paul Auster's Timbuktu, Haruki Murakami's Kafka on the Shore, or even T.C. Boyle's Talk to Me that was published quite recently.
Yet there hardly seems a literary genre which draws speaking animal figures onto the stage as pervasively as SF. As Ursula K. Le Guin famously argued, hard as Western civilization may try, quote, "There will always be stories in which the lion's mother scolds the lion, and the fish cries out to the fisherman, and the cat talks, because it is true that all creatures talk to one another, if only one listens," end quote. Notable examples appeared right in the heydays of SF, including Olaf Stapleton's Sirius, Clifford C. Mack's Talking Dogs in City, plus slightly later, Douglas Adams' Dish of the Day, which is the cow that wants to be eaten in the restaurant at the end of the universe. More recent examples, such as the talking dog, cat, and rabbit, who are the protagonists of Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely's comic miniseries We Three, and Snowball from the Rick and Morty episode Lawnmower Dog, even more explicitly pull technologically facilitated language capacities into focus. This is far from an exhaustive list. Some authors, like Adrian Tchaikovsky, who you will have heard from this morning, have written multiple works that address this theme, and we will use his novel, Children of Time, later on in our analysis. There are also examples like the movie Up, that wouldn't necessarily be classed as SF, but that use SF elements, like the dog collar that allows the dog to speak English.
And in our presentation today, we are focusing on a particular phenomenon, which is known as uplift fiction. And the term classifies texts in which animals are uplifted into the ranks of language-using sentient beings with the aid of technology. And uplift fiction has grown in popularity in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, and owes this label to SF writer David Brin and his novel The Uplift War, or his Uplift trilogy. And these stories allow for the recognition and analysis of the similarity and relationships between humans and other animals, as they imply they were able to reach human-like existence by overcoming minor differences with the help of technology. However, the terminology itself simultaneously implies an anthropocentric hierarchical order that privileges human forms of communication over the countless communicative systems alive non-human animals make use of. Hence, SF scholars, such as Cheryl Vint or Ina Roy Faderman, rightly point out that uplift fiction often rather overemphasizes the differences between human and non-human animals, and thus end up substantiating human exceptionalist convictions within their story worlds. Recent scholarly work, such as by Eva Meyer in particular, consolidates how much there is to lose by taking on this one-sided perspectives, and what we might gain if we paid more specific attention to the species-specific means of communication animals use, in fact. And therefore, it seems essential to critically examine technologically enabled animal languages within and beyond SF story worlds. And we would argue that Adam Roberts' Bête, another novel which you will have heard of during the roundtable this morning, avoids falling into this uplift trap. Instead, the novel critically negotiates animal ethical questions connected to progress in biotechnology, gene editing, and xenotransplantation. It explores the question what it might mean to bioengineer an animal to have human speech. Would the animals actually speak, or would it be a mere trick of technology or a mere function of software? Or even nothing more than an anthropomorphic misrecognition of what the animal is supposed to be in its essence. So to provide you with some basic plot information that you need to know in order to understand our presentation, you should know that the novel envisions a dystopian or utopian world in which animal rights activists have provided animals with AI microchips that enable them to talk in human words. And this uplifting technology initially triggers an increase of sympathy for non-human animals in the sci-fi story world. It follows that there's a prohibition to slaughter them, and eventually these canny animals, or bats as they are called, are even granted citizenship rights. Hence, the plot focuses on an itinerant butcher whose livelihood has been eliminated due to the prohibition to kill these speaking animal beings. Yet the AI chips soon co-evolve with their animal hosts into what we describe as post-animal beings who turn against humankind, and a violent war over territory breaks loose. And eventually, one of these tribes successfully negotiates peace conditions with the humans. However, far from romanticizing human-animal bonds, this uplifting scenario enables the narrative's biotech figures to make themselves heard and practice resistance. And moreover, and this is really essential, particularly for our topic of reading the speaking animal, the character telling the story, a first-person narrator, herself turns out to be a post-animal assemblage of a human being, who's the itinerant butcher Graham, a bat cat who's called Cincinnatus, and a non-human animal, which is referred to as a vixen, a female fox. So consequently, we argue that the uplift effect reaches beyond the animal figures in that it enables the readers to reflect critically on anthropomorphic assumptions about what animals may have to say, were we able to understand them. And the opening chapter of the book promptly dives into the heart of the issue when it complicates this uplift novum, because it depicts the narrator, and the narrator is seemingly the butcher named Graham at this point. He's trying to shoot a bat cow in his slaughter room, and she's begging for her life. So what the cow says is, "Won't you at least Turing test me, Graham?" the cow asks. So she implies that were she to pass the test and be considered a human-like machine, she may be allowed to live. However, she does not raise the butcher's sympathy, and he does not, and I quote, feel like he's talking to a cow, even a really smart one, because he feels like he's talking to a spokesperson from the Deep Blue, Deep Green organization, and thus he decides to pull the trigger anyways. So the butcher refuses to spare the bats from slaughter, as he insists that non-human animals speaking in human tongues are mere anthropomorphic projections and not the animals themselves.
Excellent. So much of the novel turns on questions of language and technology, which in turn link to questions of who can be a person, who or what can have consciousness, who or what is killable, and the like. Graham spends a lot of time telling the animals he is speaking to that he is just talking to a chip. And not only do they insist that they themselves are conscious, but they also question his unwavering belief in his own consciousness. And how can he tell if he's not simulated? And this is further underlined by the post-human narrator assemblage. So on the screen, there's a quote from Graham talking to Cincinnatus, and they're talking about the idea of tertium quid, which in a different part of the novel they explain means, quote, "the chip melds with the animal mind to create a tertium quid," end quote. And this phrase, which is Latin and comes from Greek, means some third thing. So something indefinite or left undefined in some way, but is related to two definite or known things, but distinct from both. So here, Roberts is playing with philosophy of mind and ideas of the post-human to provoke questions about animal intelligence, animal consciousness, and the possibility of a post-humanism that is more post-animalist, a playful SF depiction, SF perspective rather, which decenters the human, i.e. non-human animal, but nevertheless includes the human as a type of animal, thereby suspending the human-animal distinction. So I won't read out the whole quote, but the idea is that Cincinnatus is sort of poking back at Graham. So now we're going to move on a little bit. So if you're interested in this, go ahead and take a screenshot. And we're going to look at a passage that is focused specifically on the problematics of language and uplift technology. And this passage will be presented alongside a passage from Tchaikovsky's Children of Time. So this excerpt is from a discussion between Graham and his son Albie, who works for room and board at a canny cow-owned dairy farm. So while in previous discussions, Graham has been engaged, he's been really focused on the cyborg-like qualities of the Bêtes. This passage instead particularly focuses on one of the problematics involved in uplift fiction, which is the idea that the capacity to use human language is equivalent to intelligence. Obviously, Graham has a vested interest in ignoring any indications that the animals he's speaking to are actually communicating their own desires and consciousness. His whole identity as a butcher rests on it, rests on animals being animals and being killable. So he says here, quote, "Talk is the problem. Talk is what humans do. It's like some super spider took charge of the world and modified all other animals so that they shat silk strands and wove webs with the stuff. Every animal would be spider-like. It wouldn't be nature discovering its fucking inner spiderness. It would be an imposition, exactly the same kind of imposition." And his son responds, "But animals have feelings and thoughts. Animals have always had feelings and thoughts. It's just that only now they've been able to bring them out." So Graham brings up an interesting point here. Humans have a habit of trying to make animals legible to us by making them communicate as we do, and then interpreting their relative levels of intelligence based on their abilities to conform to human language. Even within the story world, cows appear smarter than other animals because they can pronounce human phonemes better than, say, dogs who sound a bit ridiculous. And this passage works beautifully alongside Adrian Tchaikovsky's 2015 novel, in which spiders are genetically modified to become sentient and develop intelligence. They have their own science, technology, and communication systems in their own culture. So now we'll turn to a passage from that book. So I won't read the whole thing, and again, feel free to take a screenshot. But the passage here recounts a first contact scenario. And well, there was a first contact between humans and these sentient spiders in which they capture one who they call a giant and hold her in captivity. So the spiders attempt to communicate with their giant. They're not quite deaf, but they can't hear any human language. So eventually the giant begins trying to use spider language, moving, quote, its extremities, the deft sublegs that it used to manipulate objects, in a manner imitative of pulp signaling, end quote. The giant is not very good at this, so the spiders conclude that it must not be very intelligent. So they conclude, quote, that the giant was a simple creature, probably designed to undertake labor suitable for a thing of its immense size and strength, but no more intelligent than a posset beetle or a spitter, and perhaps less, end quote. So the description here is not unlike the way humans talk about or interpret animal communication, including things like the dog soundboard mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, where the dog is sort of infantilized, even though it appears to be using human language to communicate. So what to gain from uplifting the speaking animal? From an animal ethics perspective, these kind of texts demonstrate a radical challenging of anthropocentric perspectives on multiple levels. And in both, the post-animalist characters epitomize this idea. In Children of Time, the novel challenges human hierarchizing of animal species by making spiders, who are normally derided or feared, into the uplifted life form, rather than the more easily anthropomorphized mammals that are more frequently uplifted in these types of fictions. That they are uplifted is in fact an accident. It was meant to be monkeys. And therefore the challenge to anthropocentric hierarchies of animal worth and intelligence is challenged not only through the reader's reaction, but also within the novel itself. It also challenges anthropocentric notions of speech through its first context scene, inverting the ways humans might dismiss non-human animals due to their relative opaqueness.
Yes, and we would argue that Bête works similarly. At first, on the level of thematics, it showcases the discrepancy that there is between techno-utopic promises of biotechnology use and its material consequences, because the novel traces how the language-using bats are protected at first, but then they're quickly slaughtered in even greater numbers than ever before. And also the novel engages even more deeply with ethical caveats involved in the idea of an animal uplift, as it challenges anthropocentric perspectives through the post-animal narrator. Because instead of portraying the bats as language-using animals, Roberts has them appear as post-animal beings where something else has been added, which is an unexplained but decisive ingredient that links the animal with the AI chip and causes post-animal creatures to evolve. And these epitomize, we would say, the absurdity of human attempts at uplifting other animals upon their level, whether these take place on the level of fiction or in the real world, or in the shape of language teaching experiments, or in the alleged human-pet communication facilitated with the aid of technology. And tying on to what we have mentioned earlier with regards to the anthropocentric framing of language in these human endeavors, that seems to be pressing the finger right into the wound, because no matter how honorable our intentions may be, presenting other animals cannot overcome anthropomorphic filters. And with this, we do not wish to imply that attempts at understanding animals' needs and concerns are in vain, or that the use of technology in multi-species communication is inherently a bad thing. It is essential, however, that these attempts remain conscious of the anthropocentric bias and open to more than human communicative systems, because superimposing anthropocentric conceptions of language onto animal languages may cause researchers, readers, as well as pet owners to lose sight of what the animals are actually trying to express. And humans trying to read their own communicative systems into animal languages may therefore be missing out on the chance of interacting with other animals in an attentive and species-specific manner. So with regards to reading the speaking animal, it is this significant otherness of animal perspectives and thus the unavoidable anthropocentric bias of any such attempt, which Bête seems to advocate above all else. And we would conclude that Children of Time does something very similar. A big difference between these two texts is that we have only third-person narrative voice in Children of Time, and we have a direct first-person perspective in Bête. This means that a novel like Bête really opens up the chance for readers to engage with this biotechnologically enabled animal speech. And with this, on that note, we would thank you for now. We really thank the organizers for accommodating us in this hybrid and unusual format. And we thank you all for listening. And we would really love any feedback, as we've already mentioned earlier. So feel free to contact us via email or social media if our work in progress has sparked our interest. And we really thank you a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'll be there for the live Q&A, so speak to you shortly.
Bye-bye.
Bye.